Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marlena Watt from 7 News. First of all, I want to say, as a Gumulgal person of Mabiag Island in the Torres Strait, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. My deep respect and gratitude to the elders. Adrian Schrinner became the 17th Lord Mayor of Brisbane in 2019 with many years of experience as councillor and former Deputy Mayor of Australia's largest local government. Born and bred in Brisbane, Adrian worked for the family cleaning business and served in the RAAF before working in a range of roles in both federal and local government. He was particularly drawn to the unique community building and city shaping role that Brisbane City Council played and jumped at the opportunity to serve the residents as a local councillor. He was first elected as the Councillor for Chancellor Ward in 2005 and within 3 years was asked by the Lord Mayor to join Civic Cabinet. Chairing several different committees, finance, transport and infrastructure, Adrian gained extensive experience across key areas of council responsibility. In 2011, he was elected by his colleagues as Deputy Mayor and served in that role for 8 years. Adrian has a clear vision for the future, and his simple goal is to ensure the Brisbane of tomorrow is better than the Brisbane of today. By delivering new infrastructure for a growing city and record investment in parkland and green space, Adrian is leading his team to transform Brisbane for the better. City shaping projects are underway and include the Turn Up and Go Brisbane Metro, Green Bridge construction, and the Victoria Park vision that will create Brisbane's biggest new park in 50 years. Meanwhile, Adrian is firmly focused on improving the areas where most residents live. His Suburbs First guarantee is ensuring at least 80% of all council expenditure is invested in the suburbs. As Chair of the Council of Mayors South East Queensland, Adrian played a vital role in helping to secure the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games for the region. He's now a Vice President and Board Member of the Brisbane 2032 Organising Committee. Please welcome the Lord Mayor.
Well, thank you, Marlena, and I also want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. To Peter Kelly, to my elected colleagues, Jim McDonald, MP, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Krista Adams, Councillor Fiona Cunningham, Councillor Lisa Atwood, also Toowoomba Region Councillor Nancy Summerfield, City of Ipswich Councillor Nicole Jonick, distinguished guests. Have I missed any councillors? Yes, Greg Adderman, my apologies, serving the Pullenvale ward in Brisbane's western suburbs. Anyone else? No? Ladies and gentlemen, so wonderful to be with you this afternoon for what I think is a critical point in the city's history. We are so fortunate to live in a city that just keeps getting better all the time. As you probably would have heard, just recently, my colleagues in the Council of Mayors for South East Queensland and I visited Canada and the US, visiting the cities of Vancouver, San Francisco and Los Angeles. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from other cities, and we should absolutely do that. Not only what works, but what doesn't work. And there are a few of both kinds of lessons from that visit. But let me tell you, I am more convinced than ever before. There is no better place than Brisbane. And as you come into this city, flying into the wonderful Brisbane airport, and you look out of the window and just see this expanse of green, and you see the beautiful Brisbane River, you see all of the cranes, everything happening. It is so good to be back. Wherever you might go around the world, see amazing places, it is always a sense of gratitude that comes over you when you come home to this beautiful place. Now, I'm not for a moment playing down how tough recent years have been. They've been incredibly challenging. And in fact, it was less than a year after I first became Lord Mayor that we entered the pandemic. And if that wasn't enough, last year almost exactly a year ago, we had one of the most devastating and costly floods our city has ever seen. But as a city and as a community, we've risen to every challenge thrown our way. Now, of course, prior to the pandemic and the flood, we did have a bright future as a city. There's no doubt about that. But despite the big hits that we've had, the big challenges, whether it's pandemics or floods, we've emerged from these with an even brighter future than we had going into them. We've not only emerged as Australia's fastest growing capital city, we've emerged as the host of the Olympic and the Paralympic Games. People from around Australia and around the world are voting with their feet, and they're voting for Brisbane. They're coming for so much more than what they used to come for. They're not coming to retire to the Sunshine State. They're coming for the fantastic lifestyle, the job opportunities, the vibrancy that our city and its suburbs offers. It's a lifestyle that is the sum of so many intricate parts, all adding up to something, a city that has evolved and matured in leaps and bounds. The Melburnians, who not long ago scoffed at Brisbane and reminded us that they were the world's most livable city, are coming here in droves. And in fact, the exception is Mel, who's a Brisbane resident who actually went to live in Melbourne. Shame on you, Mel. But we're happy to have you back anytime. But for those Melburnians coming here, we're not holding it against them. We may have a long memory, but we're not going to hold it against them. We're going to give them a warm Brizzy welcome. We are proud to share what Brizzy has become, what Brisbane has become. And we didn't just emerge from the pandemic with more people. There are now more food businesses operating in Brisbane today than before the pandemic. And why do I mention this? Well, if you think about it, food businesses are actually a great barometer of the health of a city, a community, and economy. Food businesses are also an essential part of our lifestyle. Not just in the city, but right across the suburbs of Brisbane. And in fact, the biggest growth in food businesses has actually been in the suburbs. Now, like all city centres across the globe, our CBD was hit hard by the pandemic. There were all kinds of predictions about the beginning of the end for CBDs around the world. But let me borrow a little from Mark Twain, and I'm here to tell you that reports of the death of the Brisbane CBD were greatly exaggerated. During the recent Christmas shopping period, for example, Queen Street Mall was packed. Council's foot traffic figures in the Queen Street Mall surpassed pre-COVID levels for the first time since the outbreak of the pandemic. Demand for CBD office space continues to rebound strongly. The Property Council recently reported that 41,000 square metres of office space was leased in the final 6 months of last year. That's equivalent to 5 football fields of space. Of course, it's too early to declare that Brisbane has fully recovered. Yet Brisbane is certainly bouncing back quicker and stronger than so many other places, both around Australia and around the world. The Brisbane recovery story is even more extraordinary when you consider just how badly our city was smashed by the flood 12 months ago. The record 3-day rain event, which far exceeded all Bureau predictions, resulted in thousands of homes being inundated and hundreds of millions of dollars of damage to our clubs, roads, parks and playgrounds, our infrastructure. But just 1 year from the flood, our CityCat network is fully operational, and this is great considering that in the 2011 flood, it took 4 years to achieve the same outcome. We've undertaken the biggest cleanup in Brisbane's history, removing 75,000 tonnes of flood-damaged belongings from 3,357 streets, filling 117,000 potholes, cleaning and reopening 863 flooded parks, and just recently we reopened the Kedron Brook Bikeway, parts of which, as you would have seen, were completely washed away. Our strong recovery is based on some critical foundations. Firstly, responsible financial management, together with the fact that we have consistently run balanced budgets. This means we've been able to deal with unexpected financial hits. If we had have taken the easy road, like some other levels of government did, and go into deficit a long time ago, I have to say, I genuinely do not believe that we would have been able to recover as strongly and as quickly. The financial impact of the pandemic and the flood amounted to around $500 million, $500 million as a direct hit to the council budget. And that would have put us into a hole that was very difficult to get out of. But the bounce back is more than just about the city's finances. It's also about long-term planning. The journey to becoming Australia's lifestyle capital hasn't happened by accident. The way that we've planned, encouraged, and embraced urban renewal has been critical. Precincts like Newstead, James Street and the Carlisle, King Street, Fish Lane, West Village and Howard Smith Wharves are all testament to that. There's been the big growth in craft breweries, which Stephen Waddell constantly talks to me about, and boutique bars and distilleries. All of this positive change has reached a critical mass in recent times. And of course, there's a record investment in our parks and green space, critical elements of our wonderful lifestyle. I'm excited about Victoria Park, but I'm also equally excited about the $244 million we're investing this year alone into parks right across Brisbane. But all of this is just the beginning. I forgot to mention Sally Ann Atkinson, former Lord Mayor. Sally Ann, I love you. There's always one person, but the person you don't want it to be is Sally Ann. Our CBD is undergoing massive transformation, like the Queen's Wharf, Brisbane, Waterfront Brisbane, the Brisbane Metro and Cross-River Rail projects. We've also seen the renewal process gearing up and continuing to expand through Olympic precincts, like the Gabba, Albion, Breakfast Creek and Hamilton North Shore. And I'm also determined to make sure that more of our Brisbane suburbs enjoy the benefits that renewal can bring. And I'll be speaking more about suburban renewal and our exciting plans in that respect shortly. But first, back to the Olympics. When IOC President Thomas Bach named the host city for the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games, the future of our city, our region, and our state changed in an instant. That little sign that was held up, you saw the cardboard sign with the name Brisbane on it, changed the course of our city's history, our region's history. Now, there's been a lot of hype about the Olympics, but I genuinely believe this is not something you can overhype. The hype is real, the opportunity is real, and the opportunity is limitless. It's only limited, in fact, by our imaginations. When the Games arrive in 2032, I want the world to discover a city that is thriving, that is clean, that is green, that is sustainable. A place that is easy to get around on quality transport connections. And like I said, this is an unprecedented opportunity for Brisbane and for our region. Now, cities like Paris, London, Beijing, Tokyo already have and had their global reputations prior to the Olympics. The Olympics were never going to be make or break for them. People weren't going to stop visiting the Eiffel Tower if their games experience was less than ideal. They weren't going to stop visiting Big Ben or attractions in London if the games didn't work out to plan. But for Brisbane, it is different. The rewards, or the potential rewards, are probably bigger than any other city that has hosted the Olympics or any other region that has hosted the Olympics. But there's also a risk. For Brisbane in 2032, This opportunity is about creating a reputation and then cementing that reputation. So many people across the world who are not yet familiar with our city and our region and our state. We've only got one chance to make a first impression. We also need to look at the Games not as a destination, but as a vehicle. A vehicle that's going to create that reputation, but also help us to fast-track the opportunities to tackle those challenges that we have as a city and as a region, the challenges that come from rapid growth. We need a mindset that considers the millions of people who will come before, during, and after the Games, not just as visitors, but as lifelong advocates for Brisbane and for Queensland. Peter Kelly mentioned the storytellers. We want these people coming to Brisbane to be our storytellers around the world, the advocates for our city and our region, telling people about this awesome place that they discovered down under. Believe it or not, it has been 589 days since that announcement on the 21st of July 2021, 589 days. Now, in that time, there's been plenty of jockeying about roles on boards. Don't laugh. Venue locations, and of course, venue funding. Yet, if we really want to be ambitious about the Games, and we really want the Games to deliver a lasting legacy, we need to move quickly past these skirmishes. We need to work together, and we need to collaborate. The critical question is not how we will run the best Games ever, but how do we use the Games to make Brisbane better than ever? How do we use the Games to make South East Queensland better than ever? Just recently, the internationally acclaimed songwriter Phineas O'Connell told Channel 10's The Project that Brisbane was in fact his favourite place in Australia. Did you see that? What he liked about our city was our urban planning, believe it or not. An unusual thing to choose, but one that gets us all excited in this room. His comments struck me for two reasons. One of the things he mentioned is that we've got a beach in the middle of the city. His comments struck me for two reasons. Firstly, when he told other people across Australia about his love for Brisbane, the reaction wasn't always what he expected. There was a bit of stick. And secondly, the thing that he chose was a legacy item, the legacy of Expo 88. We should aim to ensure that Brisbane 2032's legacy is bigger and bolder than what we saw from Expo 88, what we saw from the Commonwealth Games in 1982 or the Commonwealth Games in 2018. So what can we do to make Brisbane even better? As I said, the opportunities are endless, but let me start with a couple of things that don't involve building anything. Down the list in terms of the price tag here. Just recently I was asked what I believe we should do to revamp Brisbane's nightlife ahead of the Games. It's actually a really good question, considering people's impression of our city won't just be about the sport. Does anyone remember during G20, that embarrassing incident? You know what I'm talking about? Where the Crown Prince got punted from a nightclub for not having the ID, lockout laws. Don't want a repeat of that. My response was simple. Brisbane should aim to be the Barcelona of the Southern Hemisphere. Today, Barcelona is a tourist mecca that is regarded as a fun place to visit, a thriving place. And a big part of that was how they transformed the city for their Olympic Games. So what should we do? I'd like to see all kinds of things put on the table, from 24-hour trading in our inner city areas through to activating a network of suburban village precincts for live sites and street parties. I'd like to see the state government's lockout laws scrapped, although that's a position I've had well before the Games came along. I'd like to see trading hours for retailers and licensed venues become part of this discussion. I sometimes like to go shopping in the middle of the night, and the only place I can go is the Brisbane Airport Woolies. Why is that? Why can't we change that? Surely there's demand for more 24-hour trading, not just for retailers, but also for licensed venues. That flexibility is something we should consider. And I'm sure not a lot of people will be surprised to hear me say we need a new trial of daylight saving for Queensland. Yes, our games will actually be in winter and not in summer. But it was recently pointed out that Brisbane's summer sun rises earlier than any other city in the world. And in fact, that point is 4:45 a.m. at the peak of summer. Now, some of you would wear these kind of devices, the fitness tracking apps. And there was a release of information recently of fitness tracking app data from around the world. It was an authorised release, not an unauthorised release. And they monitored which city in the world gets up the earliest. It's actually Brisbane. I'm not sure how many of you would know that, but Brisbane residents get up the earliest of any residents in the world. 6:35. I get up a little bit earlier than that, but 6:35 is the average wake-up time for Brisbane residents. But by 6:35 in summer, we've already wasted almost 2 hours of daylight. So hands up, would you prefer that daylight to be in the morning or in the evening? Yeah, evening? Okay, you're with me. Let's do it. In contrast, our Olympic friends in Paris get up at 8 a.m, but they go to bed well after midnight. It's very French. And I think the people from Barcelona get up at a similar time and go to bed at a similar time. We all know the economic benefits that can come from daylight saving. It's estimated to be around $4 billion annually. It's a thing that can be done really cheaply, virtually no cost, and it can be done quickly. Why not have a trial next year? Our games must also, this is a very serious point, they must also showcase First Nations culture. But not just showcase First Nations culture, they must provide meaningful opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to benefit from the Games. Not just a showcase of culture, but an opportunity for Indigenous and First Nation businesses to grow and be involved in the Games process, and a whole legacy that can come out of that is positive for our First Nations people. They must also demonstrate a climate positive approach and showcase world's best sustainability. They must create a lasting legacy for our residents. Now, the recent $7 billion funding agreement between the federal and state governments isn't just about the Gabba or the Brisbane Arena. It also includes upgrades to a range of other Games venues, including the Sleeman Centre, the Tennyson Tennis Centre, the Belmont Rifle Range, and the list goes on. Now, this is a great outcome, don't get me wrong, but what good are all of these upgraded venues if you can't get there? Transport to the Gabba and the Brisbane Arena will be fantastic. Both of those locations will be serviced by Cross River Rail and Brisbane Metro. But what about all the other venues around the region? This will be one of the most diversified and spread out games that have ever been held. The model in the past has always been a centralised Olympic village. We're spreading it out. That creates a transport challenge, but also creates a transport opportunity for our region. So for a Games spectator to go from watching the Olympics at the Gabba, watching the athletics at the Gabba to the gymnastics at Sleeman Centre, how will they get there? How will a Games spectator go from the basketball at Albion to an event on the Sunshine Coast when our current rail system stops at Nambour? As a fast-growing city in a region, questions about our transport future are probably the most critical questions we must ask, and we must ask them now. How will someone from Brisbane's eastern suburbs get to the inner city? We cannot lose sight of the fact that the mayors of South East Queensland came together to go after the Games because of the challenges of growth. because of the challenges of transport and the challenges of infrastructure. The Mayor's recognised the unrivalled opportunity that the Games presents to get all levels of government working in lockstep to deliver game-changing transport infrastructure. Now, stadiums are great on nights and weekends, but they won't get you home sooner and safer. We urgently need a dedicated transport and infrastructure plan to support the growth of the entire South East Queensland region. With 589 days already gone, we can't afford to lose any more time. We must also remember that the Games must benefit everyone. If we're going to ensure residents remain on this journey with us, we have to deliver a transport plan that delivers a lasting legacy for our residents, long after the Games fades into our memory. In Vancouver, we saw a city transformed by their Winter Olympics. Now, despite their long, cold winters, more than 50% of trips in Vancouver today are taken on public transport and active transport, so walking, cycling, trains, buses. In Brisbane, it's less than 20%. In Los Angeles, it's less than 10%. Over the next 10 years, the Vancouver region is planning 9 new rapid transit routes. So even though they've got great public transport, they've got great usage, they're striving ahead to make it even better. But interestingly, they're not building 9 new rail lines. They're planning to build transitways serviced by fully electric vehicles. In fact, in the PowerPoint presentation they showed to us, the project they are mirroring is actually the Brisbane Metro project. But they're going to build 9 lines to our 2 lines. We're going to do better. They've calculated that building transitways designed for Brisbane Metro-style vehicles will be 25 times less expensive than extending the existing rail line. They've also estimated that a transitway can be planned and built in as little as 3 years, whereas a rail line, based on their past history, usually takes more than a decade to plan and build. And in fact, the City of Christchurch, New Zealand, also recently produced a rapid transit blueprint, partly modelled off, you guessed it, the Brisbane Metro. And so this, in my mind, presents a great opportunity to roll out mass transit to many more parts of Brisbane and the region. A mass transit that doesn't take 10, 15 or 20 years to plan and build, but that can be delivered between now and 2032. We're running out of time for planning, but now is the time to get serious. We can have world-class transport across Brisbane and across South East Queensland if we start now, we do the planning and we get on with it. Now, we also support the extension of rail, and that has always been part of our pitch as a group of mayors for South East Queensland. As I said before, the Sunshine Coast extensions are essential. We also need work on the Gold Coast line, and Toowoomba would actually like a train. Even to the base of the mountain, they would like a train. All 3 levels of government are already investing in Brisbane Metro, so it provides a great model to roll this out further. If all 3 levels of government got behind an Olympic transport blueprint that includes rapid transit lines, just imagine the amazing legacy it would create for our city and our region and beyond. Just one example is the Eastern Corridor. We know the Gabba is a central part of the Olympics, but we also know the Chandler Indoor Sports Centre, the Anna-Meares Velodrome, the Brisbane Aquatics Centre, the Brisbane International Shooting Centre, and the yet-to-be-built Redlands Whitewater Centre, all through that Eastern Corridor. And so Mayor Karen Williams from Redlands and myself got together and pitched to the state a joint planning exercise to get rapid transit out to the eastern suburbs. The state said yes. This is an exciting opportunity and one that can be replicated in other parts of the region. The plan also needs to look beyond transport. Transport is critical, there is no doubt, but some of the things that we need to sort out between now and 2032 are things like water security. When we were in Los Angeles recently, it was hard to miss the public messaging about how it was a city struck by drought. And in fact, I got flashbacks when in the hotel room there was a sign saying, "Limit your showers, turn off the tap while brushing your teeth." This is exactly what we went through during the Millennium Drought. LA and Brisbane both have a problem with floods and also with drought. And it's just as likely that we will have a drought in 2032 as a flood. And I suspect it's more likely that we'll have a drought in 2032 than a flood. When visitors to Brisbane arrive, we want them to see a clean and green city, not a clean and brown city. We don't want them to remember the bone-dry city where you were given a shower timer at the Brisbane airport and told to limit your shower. As a fast-growing region, water security needs to be a key part of our planning. Now, whether it's desalination, or dare I say, switching on the idle Western Corridor recycled water pipeline, I'm agnostic. But I firmly believe our region needs more water security and, in fact, another permanent water source to supplement the big supply in Wivenhoe Dam. Now, in the past, there have been very few elected representatives who are prepared to put their head up and say, "I support recycled water." But I'm hoping that over time, and also the continued and further release of the scientific evidence will help change that. But I also know that it's not likely that the government will rush into building new dams. And so I want to propose something that might be an alternative. Back in late 2014, the Queensland Government Department of Energy and Water completed a study into flood mitigation options, including the option of raising the Wivenhoe dam wall by up to 8 metres. The analysis in this study indicated that up to 10,000 fewer buildings would have been inundated or flooded in Brisbane and Ipswich in any one of Brisbane's 3 largest flood events. If we had a repeat of the 2011 flood, raising the dam wall by just 4 metres, as well as other mitigation measures, would have resulted in the peak flow being reduced by a third and 8,150 fewer buildings being flooded. Now, I get these are complex issues, but our region's growth, coupled with the prospect of climate change, means that measures to increase water security and shore up our region's drinking water should be seen as an Olympic legacy. It should include an Olympic water infrastructure plan. Now, finally, let me talk to a current issue that is literally on the tip of all of our tongues at the moment, and that is the issue of housing availability and housing affordability. I mentioned before, we came out of the pandemic as the fastest growing capital city in Australia and at the heart of the fastest growing region in Australia. At the same time as all of this growth, global inflation, interest rate hikes, supply chain disruptions and labour shortages have continued to drive up construction prices. We've seen so many major builders go under, and all of this is creating what has become a perfect storm when it comes to housing. The demand for housing is rapidly rising at the same time as the industry simply cannot afford to build new homes. At the same time, we have the truly absurd scenario of the Greens and some Labor councillors routinely opposing the development of new homes, but at the same time complaining about affordability. Not even a proposal just nearby this venue for the world's greenest building was green enough for the Greens. So let me dispel a couple of claims that keep conveniently getting repeated during this debate about housing. Brisbane has been pulling its weight when it comes to approved housing supply. According to the state government's 2021 land supply and Development Monitoring Report, Brisbane remains on track to accommodate the 2041 dwelling supply benchmark. So as you know, the state sets a regional plan target. We are on track to meet all of those targets. The 2022 report has not yet been released, so the 2021 is the last available report. And it shows that there's about 47,000 apartments that have already been approved, received their development approval, and are ready to build. Over and above these pre-approved homes, Brisbane has 15 years of planned dwelling supply, which has been achieved through both the city plan and also our neighbourhood planning process. Our approach to housing going forward will be very clear and very straightforward. We must grow. We can't stop growth, but it must be in a well-managed way, and most importantly, it must be in a sustainable way. We will continue to protect the Brisbane backyard, our city's character, the wonderful tin and timber that is so unique to our state, while catering for the protection of green space and sustainable growth. Our council has been doing this for many years and will continue to do it. But the Brisbane Sustainable Growth Strategy, which I'm releasing today and which hopefully you should get access to a copy of, includes new measures. In fact, more than 25 new measures to help address demand both in the immediate and the long term. Importantly, you would have read today, we plan to remove the residential height restrictions in the Kurilpa area of South Brisbane. So this will mean CBD-style apartment buildings that will be allowed in the area, creating up to 10,000 extra homes over time. Now, other than the CBD itself, there is no better located place or part of Brisbane that is better serviced by transport, by infrastructure and by facilities than the Kurilpa precinct. It's got train services, it will have metro services, it's got the city glider, it's got multiple bridges, it has river walks, it has bikeways and bike lanes and bike paths. From Kurilpa you can literally walk, scoot or cycle to the CBD in a matter of minutes. So instead of creating more urban sprawl or destroying green space, 10,000 homes can be provided right here in Kurilpa. And more importantly, I have a vision to see it become Brisbane and one of Australia's most sustainable communities. Kurilpa residents may choose to own a car, but they won't actually need one. In addition to the Kurilpa plan, we'll be incentivising build-to-rent projects by allowing infrastructure charges to be repaid rather than upfront over time. We'll also establish a dedicated unit within council to fast-track build-to-rent approvals. Through our suburban renewal precinct process, we'll continue to identify underutilised commercial and industrial land that can be converted into residential and mixed-use communities. We will allow greater flexibility on these sites so that they can be used for a range of housing types, including townhouses. We've already identified 70 hectares of land for this purpose, with the potential for significantly more to come. Finally, we'll review our major centres, Chermside, Carindale, Garden City, Indooroopilly, Toombul and Toowong, to unlock more housing and more jobs close to high-quality public transport services. Ladies and gentlemen, our city is blessed with incredible natural assets. Our rivers, creeks and bushland are all part of our diverse and beautiful part of the planet and our natural environment. We will and we are determined to protect and cherish these wonderful natural assets that are such a critical part of our lifestyle. But also our greatest asset is our people. And as we embark on the journey of the select group of cities to host the world's greatest sporting event, and along that journey, creating a global reputation that lasts, we must always remember to include the residents at the forefront of everything we do and all our decisions. We must ensure that the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games delivers much, much more than hopes and dreams. It must deliver a legacy for everyone who calls Brisbane and South East Queensland home. That legacy must include better transport, more homes, thriving businesses, stronger communities, and the ongoing protection of our lifestyle and our environment. As the Lord Mayor of this city, I'm committed to seeing these things happen, and I'm committed to making sure the Brisbane of tomorrow is even better than the Brisbane of today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Marlena, I understand there's questions. Can we skip that part?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We are running 10 minutes over, so
That's my fault.
We'll get stuck into it. Skyscrapers in South Brisbane, how long in reality will that take, and how much public consultation will there be?
So it's going to happen in two stages. The first stage we're proposing is a temporary local planning instrument, which will effectively enable this to happen. Temporary local planning instruments can last for 1 or 2 years, and then during that 1 or 2 years, we'll go through the process of formally changing the Brisbane City Plan to enable this to happen. We have a crisis at the moment. There is no doubt about it. And I understand that growth, building of new homes is always a challenge when it comes to local communities. There is no doubt about that. I have lived local government for now 17 years, and so I understand these issues are the source of major debate. But I genuinely think if you can't have growth and new homes being built in a place like Kurilpa that is so well serviced by transport, that is so close to the city, then where can you have it? And the alternative is literally an unsustainable future that sees more and more sprawl, people living further and further away from where there are facilities and transport. And so I genuinely believe that taking an area like Kurilpa and creating a brand new sustainable community with up to 10,000 new homes for people is the right thing to do.
So when can public consultation start?
Public consultation starts today, and I know the discussion and the debate starts today, and I know that there'll be lots of opinions on this. But when it comes to a crisis situation, which is what we've got, I think they're the times when our leaders have to stand up for what they believe in and put a case forward. Now, I know there will be some people that will disagree with me, and I'm happy to have those debates, and I'm happy to listen to feedback. I'm always happy to do that. But this is something I genuinely believe is the right and sustainable outcome for the city. And so going forward, we do need a quick outcome when it comes to making changes that will facilitate new homes.
Do you want to see, as part of this strategy, mandatory quotas for affordable housing? So, for instance, some of the new unit towers would have a percentage, portion set aside for affordable housing?
Yeah, look, that is something that we have looked at and something that we are certainly open to. We know that there's a discussion around that that happened at the Housing Summit recently. The thing for us, which is the sticking point, is there needs to be legislative change to allow that to happen. So at the moment, it is possible, in theory, to provide incentives for affordable housing, but there's no legislative mechanism available to us at the moment to ensure that it stays affordable. So someone could pocket the incentive and then sell it on the private market soon after, and there's nothing we can do about it. So until we have some legislative change that will enable that to happen, we will continue to work with the state. So there's some work to be done on that, but we're certainly open to it. We have to consider a whole range of different options to make sure that housing is available and housing is more affordable.
And within that Kurilpa precinct, how much consideration have you given to Olympics infrastructure needs within that area?
Well, we know that the state government is doing some planning work, and they just announced recently through the corridor from the Gabba all the way around towards this Kurilpa precinct. And we've very much expressed a desire to work really collaboratively with them on this. And so to get their support and input on Kurilpa, and also to get our input on the Gabba precinct work, I think there's a lot that we can achieve together. But once again, the Gabba opportunity and that Olympic precinct through there is quite unique because it is so close to the central city. It is not only well serviced or will be well serviced by public transport, but it's also literally walkable from the CBD, that whole precinct. And if you look at the Sydney Olympic experience, where the Western Sydney Stadium is so far away from anything and has been seen by many people as a white elephant, we don't want that. We want the facilities that are well located, close to public transport, and also have thriving communities around them. One of the things that was really quite shocking in LA was to see a $6 billion stadium, SoFi Stadium, surrounded by 10,000 car parks with all this vacant land. And I know in LA they love their cars, and I know they also like their tailgate parties before a game. But to me, for a city that has a housing challenge like they do, to have all of that wasted land around a stadium, that's not an outcome that we will see happen here in Brisbane and South East Queensland.
All right, we're going to open up the questions now to the media pack at the back. We have some roving microphones now.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Rachel Rieger from ABC News. With the development of that precinct, what is being done to flood-proof the area like we saw in the floods last year? A lot of people were stuck in apartment buildings with no power. What is being done to ensure if we do see skyscrapers in that area that doesn't happen again and there's that infrastructure to support that?
Yeah, look, really great question. The building that we're in right now is actually in a flood zone. And in fact, if you look at the Brisbane CBD, 60% of the Brisbane CBD is in a flood zone. What our response to that is that we need to continually update and change and improve the development standards so that buildings are more resilient. If we took an approach that allowed no new development in flood zones across the city, we need to remember that Brisbane is built on a flood zone. You'd have something like 20% of the entire city being off limits for any kind of change, and that would, tens of thousands of homes would be then at jeopardy. And so it's about making sure that buildings are more resilient. We can't stop flooding happening, but the way the buildings are built, we learnt a lot from 2011, and we changed the standards then. The standards are also in the process of getting changed following 2022 and what we learnt after the recent event. But we are seeing real evidence of buildings that were built in the post-2011 framework did bounce back and were more resilient. There were some really good outcomes as a result of the change in standards, and we'll continue to lift the bar to make sure that our buildings and our infrastructure are more resilient. But in a situation where we are in a housing crisis, we do urgently need more homes for people. If areas that may have flooding are off limits, we're literally taking a large percentage of the entire city off limits.
Lord Mayor, Claire Todd-Hunter from 9 News. How big a role do you envision that build-to-rent scheme will play in your strategy? And are you confident that developers are willing to retain that ownership even with those incentives?
I think build-to-rent is really gearing up to be a massive thing, and it's actually been heartbreaking to see how renters are really struggling to get homes at the moment. We've seen the COVID impact of a lot of people that had investment properties. They saw the value of their property rise significantly over COVID. They used the opportunity to cash in on that, as you would expect. And then you saw owner-occupiers coming to move in, so less rental stock available at a time when our growth rate is higher than it's been in a long time. So this is a real challenge. We urgently need more rental stock. The good thing about the build-to-rent model is that we're seeing now major investors coming and gearing up, whether it's big super firms or institutional investors. They're really interested in this, and they're really interested in hanging on to this for the longer term. When you get a super fund or an institutional investor investing in build-to-rent, they're not doing it for a short profit. They're doing it, to see a 20-year, 30-year return. And that way we can then work with those people to make sure there's ongoing and long-term supply of rental accommodation, and it provides those renters with some security that, you know, after 6 months they're not going to get kicked out. There's an ongoing supply there. And so we really think that this is going to be a growing part of our city's housing response. It's not the only solution, it's not a silver bullet, but it's really an important part, particularly when we have such little rental accommodation available. One of the things that is included in our plan is the financial incentive of allowing the infrastructure charges to be paid off over time. Now, their model is a long-term model for build to rent, particularly with those institutional investors. So they're looking at, at this as a 20-year investment plus. And so minimising the upfront cost, which in many cases will have to be borrowed potentially, and then spreading that cost out over time when they start receiving income from rent, I think will help, facilitate it. We also have a green building incentive program which continues on. So if those new build-to-rent buildings meet our criteria for green and sustainable buildings, they can get a 50% reduction in their infrastructure charges. I mentioned that we would set up a dedicated team within council to work with build-to-rent proposals and ensure that we can work with them and get them facilitated as quickly as possible.
Lord Mayor Brendan Smith from 10 News First. The council opposition says, in some good news, it welcomes this announcement today, saying it is a step in the right direction, but it's again renewing calls for the Brisbane housing strategy to be implemented and developed, which they say you announced in 2019. Where are you with that strategy and what will it entail?
Okay, so this is the strategy here. This is the one today. So in 2019, you saw we released our Brisbane Future Blueprint, and one of the responses to that was from the state government asking for a housing strategy. Our legitimate response to them was, we've just been through a pandemic and we've just become the fastest growing city in Australia. I think we need to update the South East Queensland Regional Plan and have new targets before we develop our strategy. And there was a bit of a chicken and egg debate here about which would come first. Thankfully, the state government's agreed to update their South East Queensland Regional Plan and the housing targets, but at the same time we've also decided to get on with this because we can't wait any longer. And so we'll update this if necessary based on the new housing targets in the South East Queensland Regional Plan. That updating of the plan is due to happen this year as well.
Hello, Lydia Lynch from The Australian. Just on the Olympics, the Gabba was included in the 2021 submission to the IOC, which your council was party to. Do you have any idea where that $1 billion cost estimate for the Gabba rebuild came from? And did you ever see any costings around that figure?
I read about it in the Courier Mail. And I always believe what I read in the Courier Mail. Look, no, it all happened very quickly. Having said that, I will put on the record, I do understand and support the need to revitalise the Gabba. And even if we didn't have the games, the Gabba would need to have an upgrade. It is a facility that I think will get an upgrade faster than it otherwise would have because of the games, but it is no longer fit for purpose. And you see some of the competing stadiums around Australia and around the world, it needs work. The other thing that's great about the Gabba is the location. It is well located and it will have great public transport, great walkability. So I do support the Gabba being revitalised, but I don't support it being revitalised just for the Olympics. I support it being revitalised because it needs to be revitalised for its ongoing use. The Gabba is used more than 40 weeks out of the year. It'll be used even more once it's been upgraded. And so this is an ongoing asset for the community. This is no Western Sydney Stadium. This is right at the heart of the action and will be a great venue and a great legacy for the people of Brisbane. In terms of the cost, look, of course, I'd love to see it be built for less than what is proposed. There's a lot of pressures when it comes to building things at the moment, but I think the only way you could get the cost of the Gabba down right now is to build it somewhere else. You could build it somewhere else cheaper, but then would you have to build all the transport and infrastructure to that new venue? And then what would be the total cost of all of that? So the fact that we have, a $5.4 billion Cross River Rail and a $1.7 billion Brisbane Metro being built right next to the Gabba already, it really is a multiplier effect. So look, it's cost is a challenge, there's no doubt, but I think revitalising the Gabba is the right decision.
Just a quick follow-up, if you don't mind, Marlena. Given the project's already had a 170% overrun, are you concerned about more cost blowouts before we actually see any design plans?
That's something that every leader is always concerned about, there's no doubt, and especially with this inflationary period that we're in. We do hope that settles down a bit, and I know everyone's hoping the same thing. We need inflation to come down, we need those pressures to come down, not only for big projects like the Gabba or infrastructure, we need it to come down for housing affordability as well, because housing projects aren't happening because of those cost pressures and inflation pressures at the moment. So it's something that we all hope gets resolved very quickly, but I do believe it will be resolved to a larger extent by the time work actually starts on the Gabba.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm Joe Hinchliffe from Guardian Australia. You've spoken today about wanting to see more young people live close to the CBD. How does your plan ensure that Colpara Precinct and others like it are affordable to young people? Now, Marlena mentioned quotas, and you've spoken about build to rent, but what else are you doing? How are you planning to stop, to prevent this from being purely luxury style apartments, short-term rentals? How are you making sure that young people can actually afford to live there?
Look, there's a range of different things, but overall, if you look at the evidence when it comes to apartment supply or unit supply in Brisbane, there's been a really fascinating trend over the last decade or so where we saw, for example, a big investment in apartments happening in 2016. So, and you'll remember reading at the time in the media about talk of an oversupply of apartments at that time. So what that big injection of supply did is it kept prices relatively steady for a significant period of time. And if anyone in this room owns an apartment themselves, they would have probably seen this experience play out where apartment prices in Brisbane have not risen nearly as fast as standalone house prices have. And that's because of that supply being injected into the mix. And so demand and supply, it's a basic law, it does work. It does help moderate price increases. And together with some other incentives that we can bring in, so the build to rent is one of them. We can work with the state government when it comes to what incentives can be provided for affordable housing, but making sure that that housing stays affordable rather than any profiteering that might happen on that. So there's a range of things we can do, but supply is a critical one.
And just a quick follow-up, if I could. You're speaking about supply and demand and market forces. Obviously, you will be working with developers in ensuring this plan comes to fruition. Are you also working with community housing providers to make sure that it suits the needs of the people who will end up living there?
Yeah, that is something that we continue to do. And also we're very proud investors and owners of the Brisbane Housing Company as well, which is a joint state government and Brisbane City Council entity that has provided thousands of social homes and affordable homes for people. And they've got really exciting plans to gear up their supply as well over the coming years. So this is a space that we're very interested in, working in, and we're dedicated to.
Lord Mayor Stephanie Bennett from the Courier Mail, excuse me. You spoke about using the Olympics as a driver for that legacy transport infrastructure. Do you and your mayoral colleagues have any concerns that the state and federal government have so far lost sight of that original vision? And do you have a dollar figure of how much the council is willing to chip in to ensure we do get that long-lasting transport infrastructure by 2032?
Look, it is right to have concerns, but I'm not saying that those concerns mean that nothing will happen or we won't get a good outcome. But it is right to be concerned now so that we don't have to be concerned later. We're really reaching out across all levels of government to talk transport and talk planning. The good news is we have the city deal, which was signed last year, and provides a vehicle with which investment from all three levels of government can go for these transport projects. And so that will involve investment not only from the state and federal government, but also local councils as well. I think Brisbane City Council's record is very clear when it comes to us investing in transport infrastructure. You can see that that has happened not just now with Brisbane Metro, but consistently in the past as well. So we are prepared to stump up. We're prepared to invest, but it's always better. We always achieve more if we're working together with the other two levels of government.
Just quickly, if I can, speaking of reading things in the Courier Mail, I've heard that you first heard about the Prime Minister and the Premier signing that funding deal when it was on the front page of the paper. Given you're a Vice President on the BOCOG board, is the board running effectively and has it already become political?
Yes, I did read it first in the Courier Mail, but what I will say is sometimes these things happen deliberately or accidentally, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that it happened accidentally this time. I understand part of this was driven by the Prime Minister's schedule, which is subject to change, as you can imagine. And so an announcement that may have been normally made a few weeks down the track got brought forward. So I will give them the benefit of the doubt.
No one called you? Just pick up the phone.
Well, look, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
Just following up on that sustainability aspect of the sky high buildings, in terms of looking at owners not necessarily having cars, would that mean that in terms of the building design there would be only a handful of car spaces to incentivise using all of those public transport infrastructure points, or would you look at perhaps incentivising them not to have a car, say a discount on, Brisbane Metro or light rail or things like that?
Oh, look, that's a really good question. So, effectively, in the Brisbane CBD at the moment, and the sort of inner city, we have a maximum car parking ratio. So you cannot provide more car parking than the maximum level. So it's designed to limit car parking requirements in areas that have good public transport. In the suburbs, it's the opposite. We have a minimum, so different situation there. And so we would see that car parking requirements would be less in a place like Kurilpa than you would see out in the suburbs, definitely. And this also helps with affordability as well, because building car parks is an expensive part of building a new building. A decade ago, it cost $30,000 to $40,000 to build each individual car park in an apartment building. Are there any people in the industry now today that can tell me what it costs these days? 120? Yeah, so it's risen exponentially. So if every car park is adding something like 100 or 120 onto the price of an apartment, limiting the number of car parking spaces where there is good public transport makes sense, and it helps make the apartments more affordable. Now, there will always be some car parking, but it's just about reducing the level where there's great public transport.
Okay, well, that's all we have time for questions today. Please join me in welcoming the Lord Mayor. That concludes our luncheon.
Thank you, Marlena. Thank you, everyone.
I would once again like to acknowledge our naming rights partners, Brisbane Airport Corporation, Before You Dig Australia and Griffith University, as well as all of our other event partners. Thank you all for coming, and the Queensland Media Club looks forward to seeing you at future events. If you haven't already, please sign up to their mailing list via the QR code on the menu on your tables. See you again. Thank you very much.